Hey guys, this is Patrick Hall with Fstoppers.com, and today we're doing the ultimate Nikon versus Tamron 70-200 2.8 lens comparison. So in front of me here we have 4 different versions of the 70-200 2.8 lens. We have 2 of them from Tamron and 2 of them from Nikon. Now, I have used all of these lenses over the last couple months, couple years. I actually own the 70-200 VR2 here, but I just kind of want to give you my overall impressions of these lenses so that you can help decide which lens might be perfect for you. Let's first talk about price point. I have these lined up from the cheapest to the most expensive. With the older Tamron, this is the SP lens. I believe this thing is about $1,100 now. The brand new G2 version of this lens runs about $1,300, so it's only $200 more, and it's a brand new lens. Nikon lenses are a little bit more expensive. The VR2 lens we have here is $2,100 brand new, and the new fluorine-coated lens here runs $2,700. I've personally never spent that much on a telephoto lens, so when we put this to the test, I really have high expectations for the new Nikon. So this is probably my favorite lens of all times because it's so easy to use for portraits, for weddings, for candids, for sports, for wildlife. It is definitely a versatile lens. And so if you're gonna spend a lot of money on one good lens, I think this is really where you should put your money. So let's talk a little bit about the build quality here. For the moment, let me go ahead and just talk about the Tamron lenses and kind of compare these two. Now, if you've ever bought a Tamron lens in the past, this is kind of their older styling lens. It has the golden band around it. This is the SP version of their 70-200. And overall, I think it's built pretty well. I mean, everything's fairly smooth, the focus and the zoom. One thing I'm not a huge fan of is the tripod ring collar. This just seems kind of clunky, especially when you compare it to the Nikon designs. It reminds me a little bit more of the Canon 70-200s, but since we don't have that one here, I can't show that to you. But, you know, nothing really exciting about it, but it is kind of bulky. This lens has just 2 simple buttons, the autofocus manual focus button, and then the VC vibration compensation button. Overall, nothing great about this lens. It's definitely nicer than some of the cheap budget lenses you can buy, but I would say, you know, on a scale of 10, I'd give this maybe like a 7. The brand new G2 lens, however, is one of the most beautifully designed lenses I've ever seen. This has just a very minimal, simplistic look to it. It's got this matte black all the way throughout it. They've gotten rid of the gold label and they've replaced it with kind of a silver design here on the mount. This thing is just beautiful. You really need to see this to see what I'm talking about. They have 4 different buttons on here. They have the standard VC on and off button, but now they've added 3 different VC modes, which is really nice. They have the autofocus mode button as well. And the 4th button they've added here is a button to limit the focus range. So if you're doing a lot of long distance focusing, it's gonna make this lens actually faster. Comparing the tripod collar with the older Tamron, this thing is just better in every way. It looks like it's actually designed to be a part of the lens. And what's really cool that I think all manufacturers should do is Tamron has actually built in a Arca Swiss tripod mount into the foot itself. So if you use like the Really Right Stuff tripod heads, this will actually mount directly onto the tripod, which is really cool. Of course, it has the threads to allow for any other plate as well. So I think that this is definitely, if I had to give it a rating on a scale of 10, this is like a 9 out of 10, maybe a 10 out of 10. This is just a beautifully designed lens. So now that we've talked about the Tamrons, let's look at the 2 Nikon lenses here. And both of these honestly are pretty similar. They haven't changed the design all that much. On our old beat up 70-200 here, it has 4 buttons, which are also the manual autofocus button. They have the focus limiting button, just like the Tamron has now. You have VR on and off, and you have normal and active VR modes as well. So if you were panning or if you want general VR, you can do that on the older VR2 version. If I look at the newer fluorine-coated lens, it actually has all of the same buttons. They've added an extra VR mode. They have sport and normal now, so you have 1 extra VR mode. Everything else is about the same. And then like the original VR1 lens, which we don't have here, they have reintroduced these focus buttons. So if you like to shoot sports and hold your focus or have different focusing modes, you can now pre-program these just like you could with the original VR1 lens. I personally have never really used it, but it is a nice feature to have. Now, I was quick to praise Tamron for introducing the Arca Swiss mount into their tripod foot, but the one thing I really love about Nikon's tripod foot is you can actually remove this entirely. So instead of having to remove the whole collar, you can just remove the foot and everything packs up really nicely, and this is just a super well-designed feature. I do wish that some company would come out and just make a few of these feet for these different lenses that had different mounts in them. So if you had a Manfrotto tripod, you could actually just buy a foot, mount it on your Nikon lens, and then you would never have to add a plate to your foot again. That would be a really handy feature. But at the moment, only the Tamron G2 lens has that built into the foot itself. In terms of weight and size, all of these lenses are about the same. They're a pretty hefty lens, so if you travel a lot, the 2.8 is going to add a little bit of weight to your gear bag. And they're all about the same size. I think these are all about, without the hood, maybe about 7 to 8 inches tall. So I don't really think there's any advantage between one or the other in terms of weight or size. Now, these two lenses here, the older Tamron and Nikon lens, I don't know exactly how old they are. They're probably 3 to 5 years old now. And these two lenses by Nikon and Tamron are the brand new ones that just came out this year. They have all of the new coatings on them, and they have new lens technology, so I would suspect that these are going to be sharper, they're going to have less glare, they're really going to provide you all of the bells and whistles. These are kind of the Ferrari of lenses at this point, but by no means are these lenses outdated. These are still modern lenses, and I've been shooting most of my career on this lens here, so I have no doubt that you're going to get great results no matter which one you get, but it wouldn't be fair to do a review without doing some real tangible tests. So I'm going to set up a few tests here in the studio, and then we're going to go outside to do a few final tests as well. All right, so the first test I want to run here in the studio is kind of an unorthodox test. I need to test the concept of lens breathing. Now, I was not very familiar with lens breathing, but in doing some research on these lenses, it apparently is a big issue, or an apparent big issue. Basically, what lens breathing is it's a natural phenomenon with lenses where when you change focus or focal length, all of the lens elements change a little bit, which gives you a slightly different field of view than what might be advertised on the lens. So basically that means at 200 millimeters, you might not actually be seeing 200 millimeters. Now this is a problem with almost all zoom lenses. As you set your focal length and then you change the focus, you can actually see the lens is kind of zooming in and out slightly. Now Nikon claims to have fixed this problem. It was apparently really bad in the original VR2 lens. I own that lens. I've never once even noticed that. But this new lens, the FL lens, apparently has fixed that. And because this might cause some problems in some future tests, especially the sharpness test, we're going to go ahead and go through this first. For this test, I use the minimum focusing distance of the Nikon VR2 because it has a minimum focusing distance of 4.6 feet, which is actually the greatest minimum focusing distance of all 4 lenses. So I put the camera at 4.6 feet away, and my goal is just to put all 4 lenses on here and see if any of them show more of a zoom effect than the other. So when you compare the Tamron SP to the Tamron G2 and the Nikon VR2, you're going to notice they all look about the same. But the Nikkor fluorine-coated lens clearly has more zoom. It's going to give you not only a closer minimum focusing distance, but it's going to magnify the image overall. So now that we have seen the effects of lens breathing at the minimum focus distance, where it's probably the greatest, let's move the camera back 12 to 15 feet, something more reasonable like you would do out in the field, and let's see if lens breathing is still a significant factor among all 4 of these lenses. The results for this test are pretty similar to the previous one, only it's not quite as significant. As you can see, the 3 main lenses are all about the same, but the fluorine-coated lens does have a little bit extra zoom. Overall, I think the difference is probably about 5%. So the big takeaway from all of this is that there is a slight lens breathing issue with all 3 of these lenses except the new Nikon FL lens. It shows up the most when you're very close up, so if you're going to be shooting something macro or some product shots, or maybe you're doing a very tight headshot, you might see a little bit more zoom in the new Nikon lens. But when you step further back, it really kind of becomes a non-issue. If you're shooting portraits, if you're shooting weddings, if you're shooting sports, I don't think that this would be something to consider at all. But if you're shooting something like still life or macro shots, you're probably going to want to buy a macro lens in general because that's going to give you a whole lot more magnification than any of these lenses can give you. So now that we've covered lens breathing, let's get into the real test you guys want to see. Let's talk about sharpness. For this next comparison, I wanted to see if any of these lenses introduced a major color cast that might make it not worth buying, and I also wanted to see which lens was the absolute sharpest. So what I did was I actually got this pedal board here. It's got a bunch of different guitar pedals. They're different colors, and it'll be really easy to identify certain areas so that you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. But what I wanted to do was test the 200mm length of the lens. I feel like this is kind of what you're paying for to shoot telephoto. And I'm also gonna shoot at 2.8. And the reason is, if you're buying a 2.8 lens, at least for me, I'm gonna be shooting wide open quite a bit. I'm sure with all of these lenses, as you step down to f4, f5.6, they're probably all gonna get a lot more sharp, and it's gonna be a lot harder to identify which one's actually better. So for this test alone, I'm just simply gonna shoot wide open. I'm gonna shoot at 200mm, and I'm gonna be, I don't know, maybe 15 feet away, and hopefully that will decrease any of the lens breathing that we just saw. Okay, so here's the Photoshop file. I basically just imported all 4 files into this file, and because the Nikon FL lens had the most lens breathing, I actually had to transform the other 3 lenses out just a little bit to get them to line up. I line these up manually, so they're not perfect, but I think that's the best way to really zoom into 200% and see which ones are the sharpest. And basically, when I toggle all of these on and off, I feel like the Nikon FL lens is definitely the sharpest by far, but things get a lot more interesting when you zoom out to the corners. I don't know if you'll be able to see this on YouTube, but when I flip these on and off, I think I have to say the Tamron lenses are much sharper than the Nikon VR2. I would probably even say the older Tamron SP lens is the absolute sharpest. When I go up here to the diamond compressor pedal and do the same test, clearly you can see that the Nikon lens kind of falls apart, and it's really a toss-up between the G2 and the SP. Overall, I think the Nikon FL lens is the absolute sharpest, but in the edges, I think the Tamron SP is the clear winner, with the G2 falling just barely behind. As for color rendition, the overall conclusion I had there was that the 2 newer lenses, the Nikon FL and the Tamron G2, were both a little bit warmer than the older versions of the lens. I don't know if that's a fluorine issue or what, but both the Tamron SP and the Nikon VR2 look a little cool to me, while the G2 and the FL lens look a little bit warm to me. Overall, I don't think this is a really big issue. You could definitely fix this in post. So as you can see, it's not as black and white, it's not as night and day as I would have thought. All of these lenses showed some sharpness in some corners and some softness in other corners. But I think all of these lenses are actually incredibly sharp for what they are, and I think the differences we're talking about are about 5%. You probably could adjust for that in RAW if you just add a little bit of sharpening. I don't think anyone's gonna be looking at their pictures at 300%. So I'm gonna post this Photoshop file on the Fstoppers article so that you guys can download it and you can look at all the different pedals and see which one's the sharpest to you. I think hands down you're gonna agree that the FL Nikon lens was the absolute sharpest, but because the other 3 lenses did have that focus breathing issue, we had to zoom in a little bit, stretch those images to match the field of view of this image, which might have actually made those images less sharp. So now that we've done a few comparisons here in the studio, there are some tests I want to do out on location. So let's pack everything up, head out to the beach, and let's put these lenses through the paces. So the next test that I wanted to run was an autofocus test. I wanted to see how fast these lenses could actually snap into focus. The first telephoto I ever owned was the Nikon 80-200, and that was back before the days of ultrasonic motors. Luckily, all 4 of these lenses have a fast autofocus system built in, so I thought the best place to test autofocus would be out here at the beach. And I've spent the last 30 minutes walking around with all 4 lenses attached to the same camera. I'm using a Nikon D750. And I've just been casually focusing on things close and then focusing on things far away. And honestly, I don't really see a big difference in the speed of focus. Every one of these lenses seems to snap into focus pretty quickly. So from my subjective tests, I don't know that I can really pick a winner. So I'm gonna do something a little more methodical. I'm gonna have my friend's dog run back and forth on the beach, and I'm gonna do a series of images on motor drive and just see how many images turn out in focus. For the camera, I'm going to set this into continuous focus mode, and then on the D750, I found that my favorite focusing mode is actually the groups function. This allows me to put a bunch of autofocus points right on the dog, and it will track him as the dog runs towards the camera. So this should be a pretty strenuous test. Let's see how well each of these lenses does on the D750. For this test, I had the dog run 3 times per lens, which equaled about 60 to 100 images each. And then I simply tallied both in-focus and out-of-focus images to come up with a raw score. Overall, the Nikon fluorine lens had 75% of the images in focus, while the VR2 lens had 81% of images in focus. The Tamron SP lens did not fare very well. It had 48% of the images in focus, while the Tamron G2 lens had 67% of the images in focus. So let's talk a little bit about optical stabilization. In Nikon's lenses, they call this VR, this is vibration reduction. With the Tamron system, they call it VC, which is vibration compensation. As I've mentioned before, the very first lens that I bought was an older lens that did not have the ultrasonic motor, and it did not have any image stabilization whatsoever. And I think I would really encourage somebody buying their first 2.8 telephoto lens to get one that has stabilization. And the reason is you're gonna find yourself in situations where you need a longer shutter. Maybe you're shooting a wedding in a church, or you're just in a low lit environment, and you're going to need the lens to help stabilize the image for you. So my thought is always buy the best lens that you possibly can, and if you have that feature in the lens, it's definitely gonna come in handy when you need it. Here at Fstoppers, we're doing a lot more video work, and while a 70-200 is kind of a long lens to hand hold and get good video, any bit of stabilization is really gonna help. So instead of trying to use a slow shutter speed and take a bunch of images and see which ones are blurry or not, I'm simply gonna put the VC on or the VR on with the Nikon lenses, and I'm gonna try to hand hold this lens as well as I can at 200 millimeters and see just how well the VR works. Hopefully by looking at the video of all four of these lenses, you'll be able to see which ones stabilize the most, and that will give you a good idea of how this will translate into your photographs. So as I'm shooting here, I'm just gonna zoom all the way to 200, so that gives you the most vibration possible. I'm gonna do my best to hold as steady as possible. It is pretty windy out here, but I'm doing everything I can to really be stable. I have my left hand supporting under the lens and my right hand really tucked in as well. And I can definitely see some movement here. Let's go ahead and turn VR on and see if this movement decreases at all, and it does. Now it's very bright out here, so it's hard for me to see out in the field, but this looks like it makes a huge difference. Again, at 200 millimeters, I would never recommend hand holding this. You're probably gonna want a tripod, but you could imagine if you were taking still images, this will give you, in Tamron's case, they say 5 stops of extra shutter speed. So now that I've done the test with the Tamron lens, let's go through all 3 of these. We'll put them on the screen, and I'll give you my overall opinion on which vibration compensation works the best. As you can see, the Tamron G2 vibration compensation is really nice and smooth, even for video. When we got over to the SP, it looked very similar. It's probably the exact same technology that's in the newer lens. When we get over to the Nikon lenses, it has stabilization that's very mechanical. It's constantly moving back in a very jerky way. This VR is great for photographs, but it's just not nearly smooth enough for video. For me, when it comes down to the Nikkor lenses versus the Tamron, I have to say the Tamron lenses have the best image stabilization by far. So one final test that I thought would be pretty interesting to do while we're out here at the beach is I want to test each of these lenses in very contrasty light. A lot of times when you're shooting backlit subjects, or maybe you have a strobe light behind somebody, sometimes you can see this purple fringe around your subject, which is actually chromatic aberration. I know with my first telephoto lens, it was really bad. That was really the one downside of that lens. But with these modern lenses, they have much better glass, and they have all of these new fancy coatings on them that should really mitigate any chromatic aberration that you see. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a few shots of these palm trees over here. They're backlit. That's really where most of the aberration is going to appear. That's where you're gonna see most of the purple fringing. And it's really gonna appear where the bright sky meets the dark backlit palm leaves. So let's go ahead and test all 4 of these lenses, zoom in, and see what we find. This test was extremely hard to really judge because I've seen what really bad chromatic aberration looks like, and I don't feel like any of these lenses really had that. If I had to choose 2, I'd probably choose the most modern Nikon and Tamron lenses. You can see those 2 side by side here. But I'll let you be the judge. To me, these are all acceptable lenses, and they're nowhere near as bad as some of the ones I've owned in the past. For an extreme backlit situation, these actually all performed really, really well. All right, so here we are at the end of this video, and I am challenged with the tough decision of trying to recommend one of these lenses for you. I don't know that through this test, I really found that one of them stands out. I mean, I guess the Nikon fluorine-coated lens definitely focused fast. It had some of the best sharpness. It had the least fringing. It had great white balance. Like, everything about this lens is awesome. And it also didn't have the Lynns Breathing. So if you want the absolute largest reach from a 200, this is the lens to go to. But at the same time, this thing is $2,700. And at the moment, I do not own this lens, and I don't know that I'm going to buy this lens. So if we set the Nikon aside and say that this is the most expensive lens and it's probably definitively the best lens as well, what do you make of the last three? What do you make of the two Tamrons and the older VR2 lens? Well, I have to say that Tamron, it seems like their VC technology is better than Nikon. We use the 24-70 all the time to shoot Fstoppers videos, and I knew back then that their VC technology was better than Nikon's on that lens. Well, it's no different with the 70-200 as well. It seems like the VC is smoother, it's not as jerky. So in some ways, because I shoot a lot of video and I use this lens at very slow shutter speeds, I might tend to go towards the Tamron lens more than the Nikon. So while in my mind the VC vibration compensation is best on the Tamron lenses, I'm still left saying that the lens that I actually own, the Nikon VR2 lens, is still an incredible lens. This was the absolute best lens for focusing and following a subject. It beat even the new Nikon fluorine-coated lens. And depending on how you interpreted the sharpness test, this lens was still pretty dang sharp. So at $2,100, this lens is still a very great option. If buying a name brand lens is important to you and you want to hold the most value in your lens and you want great customer service like Nikon gives you, I definitely would say the VR2 lens is a great lens to go. However, when you start talking about $2,000 and $2,700, that's a lot of money to spend on a lens. And depending on how you viewed some of these tests, the Tamron lenses, in my opinion, actually held up pretty well. I was really shocked by the older Tamron lens because in my mind, this just looks old and I never had this lens. And in my opinion, this just, I guess I came into this test with a preconception that this would not perform well. But in some cases, it might have been a little sharper than the G2 lens that we had. It definitely was the slowest to focus. So if you're doing sports or following a subject and you need high accuracy, I don't know that this would be the first lens I would recommend, but in all of the other tests, the VC is great, the chromatic aberration is very little, the sharpness is great. I think for $1,100, like, this is definitely a lens I would consider if you're on a small budget and you don't really want to spend much more than $1,000. However, since the new G2 version is only $1,300, it's $200 more, my inclination is to definitely recommend this over the older version. You're going to get a lens that's designed much more beautifully. It has a much better collar. It has better focusing and zoom rings, which I just think feel much better. And depending on how you interpret the sharpness test, this was probably the second most sharp lens of the bunch. It was definitely sharper than the VR2 in the corners. The VC on this, the vibration compensation, was perhaps the best out of all of these. And for $1,300, this is a steal of a lens. I would have probably never originally bought this lens because I would have imagined the more expensive Nikons would have been better. But if this lens was around 5 or 6 years ago when I bought the VR2 lens and I had done this same test, I probably would have bought this lens or perhaps 2 copies of this lens, especially when you consider that the current lens is $2,700. You can literally buy 2 of these and have some money left over. So if you shoot weddings and you need 2 copies of a lens and you want to give one to your assistant or you want a backup, I definitely think the G2 version is the way to go. But if you want the absolute best quality and money is no object for you, I think that the Nikon fluorine-coated lens is by far the best lens out of all 4 of these. So as a reviewer, it's always a little frustrating to get to the end of this and not have a definitive statement about this is the absolute best lens. But at the end of the day, I would like to hear what you guys think about these 4 lenses. You've now seen the reviews that I did and you've seen the video footage. If you go to the link below on fstoppers.com, you can actually download the sharpness test and you can look at that at 200% as well and come up with your own conclusions about which lens is the sharpest. If you enjoy this review and you want more photography related videos in your inbox, subscribe to our YouTube channel below and make sure you head over to fstoppers.com because we produce content like this every single day.